Welcome back to the Madison Advisory AI Podcast. I'm your host, Verner Thompson. This is a space for thoughtful conversations about leadership, judgment, and decision making, especially in environments where complexity is high, information is imperfect, and the right path forward isn't always obvious. Rather than chasing headlines or predictions, this podcast focuses on how leaders actually think, how they weigh trade offs, how they navigate uncertainty, and how they make decisions when there's no clear playbook. My goal is to create conversations that are honest, practical, and genuinely useful for leaders who are building, growing, and making choices that matter. Today, I'm joined by Scott Becker. Scott is founder and publisher of Becker's Healthcare and partner at McGuireWoods. Over the years, he's had a front row seat to how healthcare leaders think, decide, and operate through growth, disruption, and constant change. He's also the author of Building Great Businesses, Create Momentum, Overcome Setbacks, Scale with Confidence. Scott, thanks for being here.
Amanda, what a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to have this conversation and can't wait.
You spend more time than almost anyone listening to healthcare leaders think out loud, often in moments of uncertainty and operational pressure. Today, I'm less interested in predictions and in judgment and more on how experienced leaders make complex decisions when complexity keeps accelerating and the margin for error keeps shrinking. So to start off with, you sit in this very unique position. You're not a healthcare operator yourself, but you hear the leaders in the space almost every day think out loud. When you reflect on the conversations you're part of, what do you notice about how strong leaders approach decisions when things get complex?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. I think it's a really challenging time for healthcare leaders. We had a conversation yesterday with healthcare leaders about, what do you have to be great at? And you mentioned this well. The level of complexity today, the amount of changes today, and the things that are going on today make that a much harder question for a large multi-scaled operation to answer today than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So it used to be not that long ago a major academic medical center, which was major in those days, not so huge, could decide we need to be fantastic at orthopedics and oncology. We need to be great at cardiology, whatever it might be. And you could get relatively straightforward answers and clear answers about here's what we have to be absolutely great at. I think what's happened with the pace of change, the challenges with reimbursement, the challenges with cost, and the different places in which there's constant governmental change and payer change has made it incredibly hard for leaders to make great decisions about what they have to do. And so you end up with great leaders moving back towards incredible blocking and tackling and execution and focusing on execution and more so than on strategy because strategies become so complicated again. And so I think you see this regression back towards there are so many changes going on that we better execute well with our people, execute well what we're doing, than be so strategic. It's very hard to take big risks today. One, you have to be a large enough system to be able to withstand those risks and those costs and those challenges. And two, you got to make sure you're not going to lose your job if you take a big risk and it doesn't work out. So if you went back 10, 15 years ago, a lot of health systems started their own insurance companies. Almost all of those went very poorly. And only the biggest systems that did that had their CEO survive that action. And so it makes it challenging to make big decisions and big bets. You got to be big enough to invest in technology. You got to be big enough to invest in specialists and doctors and staff, and be able to afford when things go a little bit sideways. And we've seen big back and forth in terms of results of large systems the last couple of years. So I think I'm struck by how hard it is to be as decisive. People look for military decisiveness. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality today is that's not what you see with health systems. You see much more thoughtful sort of analysis as to here's where we're going, here's what we're going to do. And in this time of incredible change, a few years ago, a lot of large systems would pick up and add to their portfolio the local rural hospital that was in trouble, and they could afford to do so. Now, they're much more cautious about doing that because it might take them away from other priorities that they need closer to home than having to fund and put money into helping a rural hospital survive even though we probably all need them to do that. So it's really challenging. You talk to the great academic medical centers, and you think, well, if you're in a great academic medical center, you have to be fantastic at research and at science. And what's happened is because of NIH funding challenges, because of other challenges, you have more and more of the great academic medical centers saying, yes, or yes, but we've got to be great at being a community service provider that provides service to everybody. And so that's a very challenging thing. I think that the decision making in big systems has become really challenging. I feel like so many big leaders are a little bit caught between trying to keep things just moving in the right direction and trying to make bigger strategic actions. And I think it's really hard.
Yeah. That's interesting because we are seeing so much activity in the M&A space. And when you think of a typical large health system CEO, you think strategy, you don't think execution or blocking and tackling, as you mentioned. So I think that's a really interesting take on it.
Well, you see, like you see M&A, but you see different kinds of M&A. You've got, for example, community health systems, which under former leadership got way out in front at trying to be the biggest by number of hospitals system in the country, and then found out they were almost like the dog who caught the car. They got to that spot, but were way over leveraged. And now they've spent the last 5 to 10 years divesting a lot of those hospitals to get their balance sheet back in the right spot. And they've done a really good job of it. You've got Tenet that did something similar and different. Tenet ended up at one point was a huge hospital chain. Now they're a big hospital chain, but they're a bigger ambulatory footprint through their acquisition and partnership with USPI. And those are big deals. Then you've got other systems that came together. Common Spirit came together between Dignity Health and Catholic Health to become a $35-40 billion health system as an advocate between the merger of Atrium, Advocate, and some other systems, um, become major systems, thinking they had to be very big to be able to have leverage and to be able to do things at scale. So you do have a lot of that. But then you've got a lot of sort of mid-size other systems. You and I both know that what used to be a large system is now a small system. A mid-sized system is now a $5 to $10 billion system, or $2 to $10 billion at least. And then there's mega systems, but they're still pale in comparison to the Uniteds of the world, the CVSs of the world that are 400, 500, $400 billion companies. So it's real challenging. But I don't see you see more selective M&A and some M&A for big reasons, like we're trying to be really big in this area or some reason. But it's a changing dynamic, you know. And you had a couple years there where everybody for 2 years ago, hospital margins were horrible. So everybody's
Yeah.
trying to recover from M&A and just get their balance sheets back in place, get operations back in place. And people were spending so much time on contract labor and so much money on contract labor and other things. They just had to get their P&L back in shape. But so I think it's a really hard time to be a really decisive leader. I think we see great leaders that have said, like years ago, there were systems that got way out in front in technology. And they made big bets in technology. Many of those systems have really grown into being great systems over the last bunch of years because they were early on in some of these things and they did them well. They executed on them well, and they grew well. I mean, I look at systems like in Chicago, Endeavor Health, on the East Coast in Connecticut, Hartford Healthcare were sort of no-name systems 20 years ago and have become great systems through decisive clarity about here's where we're going. I
Hmm.
think now as systems get to be 10, 20, $30 billion systems, it becomes in some ways harder to make decisive decisions about where you're going to be great at because you have to make more trade-offs. If you're going to be absolutely great in this area, okay, is that area going to pay for the next 10 years? And then two, what are we taking away to be great in that area? And I think people's margins are 2-3%. In a good year, a little bit higher, the for-profit's higher, but it becomes very hard to be very decisive on strategy when your margins are like that, and there's a big penalty if that strategy doesn't end up being the winning strategy.
Right. That makes sense. And in talking about growth, I guess feeding off the M&A discussion, you've watched leaders navigate growth and setbacks, and you've experienced personally a lot of growth yourself with Becker's Healthcare. Where do you think experience truly sharpens judgment, and where can it create blind spots?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what happens is what I see with experienced people sometimes is, and we talk about this a lot, is sometimes experienced leaders, because they've been great at one thing, think they'll be great at the next thing. And the experience that they should learn is, yes, they've got a head start because they know what it takes to be an expert at something, to be great at something. But what they miss sometimes is it's often going to take that same obsession and passion at that next effort, that next thing, to actually be great at that next thing. So I think sometimes experience leads people to a false sense of confidence. I've seen so many people that have made money through exits, through selling businesses, through doing other kinds of things, think that the next thing's going to be easy or that they're going to be a great investor because they were a great business builder. And they're very different things. And we see that with leadership all over the place. Experience can be a great teacher as long as you don't forget what made you successful to begin with. And so many
Right.
people tend to think, oh, you've done it before. It's going to be easy now. Many of us that grew up not with, particular means, we value the fact, oh my God, we did this. I don't know if I could do that again. So I better be clear about the fact that it's not easy. And I think you have leaders, you have some leaders with great judgment that have this great mix of caution and movement forward. And it's hard to find that, and it's hard to do. Like, and leaders get slapped for it too. So one great leader that I know, they did a ton of M&A through their systems, and at some point, the board asked that CEO to leave, to move back to somebody who's more of an operator, more than an acquirer, and so forth. And that was very humbling for that CEO. And because you're good at one thing doesn't mean you're good at another thing, and they're very different disciplines. And I think that's where sometimes some people see people have blind spots. The people that are expert in something should be very good at understanding it was very hard to acquire that expertise. It took a lot of incrementalism, a lot of learning different things to become an expert in something. And the fault line that many experts have is, oh, I forgot that I have to do that exact same thing again. And that's hard because you might have done it when you
Yeah.
were younger and more energized and more whatever, and maintaining that energy level. Like, I'm always amazed at people like Mark Cuban, Elon Musk, Judy Faulkner, that keep at it time after time after time with that energy level. I'm always amazed at these people like Carl Icahn in his 80s and 90s who was still doing deals. And I don't know that that's the life I want, but I'm amazed at the energy level to do it, to keep on having that energy to go after things at that level in a changing and complex world. So I think I love the question about experience can create a
Yeah.
false sense of confidence, can create a lot. I mean, I see great leaders that have been serial leaders, and I'm always amazed at them because they're able to, again, rebuild the team, rethink what they're going to do, reclarify strategy in a world that's changed so much over the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, it's incredible because once you become an expert, you forget at some points what it's like to start from ground zero again and what that path was. And I think that is a great reminder of a blind spot that you can create. In your experience with Becker's healthcare conferences, you've had a rare view and insight across leaders in a variety of different arenas. Was there a moment or a conversation that quietly changed how you think about what actually matters in leadership, even if it wasn't significant at the time?
Yeah, there's so many of them that I think about in terms of the first thing is I'll take back a second. I mean, the most important lesson I've learned over the years is nobody does anything without building alliances and teams. That just goes with, I mean, it should go without saying, but my belief is I was able to build great business within a law firm, a huge practice, and a great media company, but it was really through elevating and growing and doubling down on other great leaders in a thrive wave. So those people are doing fantastic. They make more money than I do. They do fantastic. There's a lot of thrive versus Scott thrives and they don't thrive. So that's one thing I think about as leadership generally. It's all about building thrive cultures and having great people that can move the ball a lot further than you can move. So that's a separate leadership lesson. The second piece of it is I get a chance over the years to interview a tremendous amount of world leaders, from people like Hillary, Bill Clinton, George Bush, uh, Venus Williams, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, just a ton of different leaders over the years. And what I have found fascinating about the different leaders over the years is that you take what they look like on TV and what people think of on TV, and they almost become cartoon characters on TV because they're so demonized by one side, so beloved by the other side. And when you meet and visit with some of the people that you talk to, so many of them are just really a pleasure of people. If, political community, I mean, it's a mixed community. Some people love Hillary, some people hate Hillary. I'm somewhere in the middle. When I've gotten to know Hillary Clinton, I'm like, there is no nicer person to visit with. I mean, it is what it is. And that would not have been my impression. So what you take away from this is the TV, the politics, and maybe they're getting worse today where there really are these deep, deep divisions. But so many people are just ultimately, at least they were or are, normal, good people. And people like Hillary, I did not expect to just love. We've had her back several times. If I had a choice to have dinner with Hillary or Bill Clinton, I would say, oh, let's have Hillary over for dinner with the family. She's just a pleasure of a person. I did not expect that from some of the TV I watch. And you see a lot of it over the years. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar gave a speech, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for people that don't know, is one of the brightest people you'll ever meet. I mean, his son is a spine surgeon. He's a really gifted person. He was one of the great basketball players of all time, the third leading scorer of all time. But what's fascinating about Kareem is his first speech, he spoke for about 10 minutes, and we did Q&A for an hour. And the 10 minutes were him with his handwritten notes, talking, and really reading his speech verbatim. And I was like, oh, this is going to go poorly, because it looked like he's sort of not used to this or doing it. Then we got into Q&A, and he was one of the brightest people that we've ever had a chance to visit with. Just an absolute pleasure and crazily intelligent. I mean, just a very gifted person. And then you come across leaders, you know, you've got different kinds of leaders. And you know this from dealing with some of your prior life and investment banking and other work. You have people that are transformative people, change makers, and then you have other people that are really great at taking an organization and keeping it moving in the right direction. And they're often two different types of people. The Peter Thiel's got a great concept of 0 to 1. The person that takes them from 0 to 1 may be very different than the person that can run that business for a long time. I mean, Steve Jobs, Tim Cook come to mind. Steve Jobs was the founder of Apple. Fantastic, brilliant. Tim Cook's done an incredible job of sort of taking that platform and growing it into this incredible business over the last 10, 20 years or so. It's fascinating for me to see this difference between different types of decisive people, different types of personalities. I mean, Judy Faulkner's really remarkable individual. She's the CEO of Epic, but the effort they've made towards constant improvement over a long period of time, her long view of it has been literally remarkable. And very few people have that
Yeah.
discipline and that ability to start something. I mean, it's literally an amazing combination and quality to be able to have that discipline and keep that constant improvement going over a long period of time. But they've just done an amazing job.
And is there a lot of teamwork at Epic? Because you hear about Epic all the time. You hear about Judy very often. And I love your take on leadership and that creating a thrive environment. In your conversations with other leaders, do you hear that same sense of building the team around them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that any gifted leader today, like when I see a leader move from place to place and he or she takes a team with them at some point that's been with them before, I often have great respect for that leader because what it means is they've built a team over a long period of time that wants to align with them, that wants to work with them, and that can move and do things together. I'm always impressed by it, and it can be done poorly too. I mean, the Lane Kiffin example from Ole Miss to LSU is a bad example of that, but that's a football example. But I see people. I don't think anybody ends up doing great things without building great teams around them. I just don't think it's doable. Like we always view you judge a leader by how does the company do when the leader's there? How many other people did the leader develop? And did the company thrive when the leader was gone? Because
Yeah.
if the company thrives more when the leader's gone, you look at Microsoft, you look at Apple, those companies have thrived tremendously past the time of their original founders. And that's a fascinating positivity about the founders and the ability that they brought in more talent and brought in other people and grew great companies, not just iconoclastic people themselves. No, Judy's done an incredible job of building a very deep group of people, deep group of team. They keep a closer press gauge on everything, so you don't see it as up close and personal. But they've done an incredible job. I mean, she's almost like Jamie Dimon in building a culture without being public like Jamie Dimon. I think she's done an
Yeah.
incredible job. They've got a very good culture where people leave Epic to do startups, do all kinds of other things, and they seem to have a relatively collaborative relationship with Epic. I think they've done an
Yeah.
incredible job. I mean, I think it's amazing. I look at software companies. I've served as an advisor to a lot of software companies or investor, and I look at companies that have they have to commercialize early and they have to constantly improve. So you constantly have to improve your product. And so Apple and Epic, I think about often as constantly having improved what they do over a long period of time.
Mhm.
and you have to stay great and to stay at it.
Yeah, Epic is a great case study of really taking over the market, but then also changing and continuously improving, and even as they're stepping into AI as well, and because they can, and they have such an inside source for a lot of the information. So translating that to AI, because it isn't the Madison Advisory AI podcast without a little a little bit of AI sprinkled in. There is a lot of discussion about AI helping leaders turn data into action. Where do you think AI really raises the bar for leadership rather than takes away, if you will?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think about it more in the healthcare context constantly of places where it's cascading use cases from administrative to clinical use cases to revenue cycles across the board to trying to get improvement in clinical, where
Right.
AI's been deep in revenue cycle and summaries for some time, moving forward in clinical and so forth and cascading use cases. Where do I think? I think what happens is I think there's this great discussion that we had with somebody who's a leader at Cedar Sinai about AI. When you look at AI, all of us should be touching or using something every day, whether it's ChatGPT for smaller tasks, for other tasks, and then the harder thing, and because you're right in the middle of this, is teaching an organization to use AI at scale, not just you and I using it for one task at a time, two tasks at a time. And of course, we increasingly find it useful. There's not a day that goes by where I'm not using ChatGPT in some way, but that's micro.
Mhm.
Macro is training a system to find ways to use it as a system and to really work throughout the system, and that takes bigger strategic thinking, a bigger alignment, and so forth. So, like I know Cedar Sinai recently trained thousands of their people on AI and how they should be using AI within Cedar Sinai. And Cedar Sinai, it's worth talking about because they're one of the top 5 systems in the country. So it's worth having that
Yeah.
discussion. In terms of leadership, you asked the question of is it going to make leaders better or worse? And it's probably going to do both because you look at this, there's like I yearly am setting goals, trying to figure out what are my core priorities this year. What am I trying to do? And this year, probably for the first time, working through several different priorities, and I went to ChatGPT and asked the question, what should this look like? What should I be doing this year? How should I put my time apart? How should I put priorities apart? And it was incredibly succinct and useful in as clear a way as any executive coach I've ever worked with, asking the
Mhm.
question. I've sort of worked with executive coaches over the years who have been great, but it was incredibly helpful and succinct and here's what you ought to do. And it's so on one hand, that kind of stuff is going to be really helpful. It's not going to be your final answer because you have to then judge, is this right? Is this wrong? How does
Mhm.
it fit into my own values, my own what I want to do? But incredibly helpful. Now, the flip side is a really close friend is a teacher and teaches advanced math. And he is finding at the high school level that the students are less prepared than they've been in a decade because so many of them are using AI for everything that they're not doing the rigorous thought themselves to get there. I mean, it almost harkens back to our earlier discussion about being an expert in one thing doesn't make you an expert in another thing because you can get good answers. But if you haven't developed the rigor of brain to apply that thinking to different places, you're in trouble. And where leaders can get in trouble is they're not thinking deeply enough. And so they're relying so much on different things that they've not developed their judgment, their decision making, and those kinds of things like they would have otherwise. There's a great book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, and it was a famous New York Times bestseller about how if we're not careful, all of us become less adept at deep thinking and able to do really significant things because we're constantly just flitting our brain from place to place. And
Okay.
I think that's one of the great challenges of how do you then use AI at scale as a system, as a company? And you do a lot of advising on that. And then how do you make sure AI doesn't lessen your ability to have great judgment, to really think through things and really work through things? I think that's another big piece of it is, that's the two sides of it. And we're seeing that front and center as teachers are complaining more and more that their students don't know anything. And people say, well, that's how the calculator was. And I don't know if that's
Yeah.
really true. I don't know.
Yeah, I think learning and the ability to learn is a portion of the brain that has to develop. So I am very intrigued how that will impact the educational system. That's a whole different topic because I do think AI is a great teammate, but if you use AI as your only resource, then you're not providing the human feedback that's necessary to excel, if you will.
No, I think that's exactly right. So I think it's a constant evolution for leaders trying to figure out how to use it to cut down time to be more efficient, to do a lot of things right, a lot of things quickly, and at the same time, continue to develop your learning skills. I mean, it's almost like the emotional intelligence skills. You can find yourself so often texting and emailing that you don't get on the phone enough or even on a Zoom call enough. And what I find is when you're actually like so many of my podcasts are done on audio, and when you actually are on screen and have to look at somebody and talk to somebody, it's a healthier way of relating, because
Mhm.
you're actually closer to a real social engagement, a real talk, and it's I think it's very healthy. And it's like so many things that get lost. You run some of those risks that AI leads some leaders not to develop their thinking and development skills enough. The best leaders will use it and it'll make them better. It'll make good leaders better. It'll make better leaders great. But the caution is that they don't develop enough of their own decision making skills and enough of their own emotional intelligence. So trying to hit those balances.
That makes sense. As we start to bring this home, I do wanna focus on your book for a little bit. You recently wrote a book, Building Great Businesses, Create Momentum, Overcome Setbacks, Scale with Confidence. Writing a book really forces you to slow down and distill patterns. Was there anything you realized or rethought while you were writing that you hadn't fully articulated before?
Well, that's a great question. I'd written a number of books when I was younger. When I was first developing a healthcare legal practice and first growing, I'd written a bunch of books. Some of them with major publishers around healthcare law, practical guidance, some other things. This book I came back to write last summer, and I spent about 3 months, literally 3 or 4 hours a day, writing the book. It was the first thing I did every morning, and it was a great exercise in the ability to actually make sure that my brain still works how I want it to work. And you'll be the judge of that when you read the book. So you'll see if that's right or not. But I actually sat down for 3 months and really wrote the 40,000 words that went into the book, which makes it a reasonable sized book, not a tome, but a reasonable sized book that should be quite readable. There's so many lessons in, it's a grind to get into that pattern of work again, because I do so many things. So I'm talking to so many different people a day, doing so many different things to actually discipline myself to sit down for 3 hours a day and write and really cut off outside distractions is really healthy. I mean, it's really healthy. I can't do it all the time because it's daunting. And once you've written a good deal of it, you're like, oh my God, I want to put my hands up and be done with this for a while. And there's different ways in which one works today. In the old days, as a lawyer at a big firm, you dictate stuff, give it to your secretary, she transcribe it, and the world has changed because you do so much stuff today on your own phone or your own iPad or whatever your mechanism for working is. But no, there's so many different pieces of it, and the challenge of sitting down and writing 40,000 words is the energy to come back and relook at it and rewrite it because good writing is editing. And so, like, what I write is a few chapters, then I come back and spend days rewriting and revising those chapters. And then it's also always very weird because they're on a screen or you're looking at them on a screen versus really being able to objectively pull yourself away from it because you're really doing it over a period of time. So it's a fascinating exercise. I don't want to do it other than every so often, but it's a really fascinating exercise, and it's interesting to get outside feedback on it, outside criticism on it. There's so much learning that goes into it. The challenge, of course, is I am an execution driven person. So at some point you're done and you want to be done with it. And I have a co-editor, so she was able to help clean it up. Then it went to a professional publishing firm that then cleans it up further. But it's a process and it's a learning process. It goes back to this Cal Newport deep work concept of periodically going deeper. I spend so much time on all the bad things that people do on LinkedIn, on social media, on talking to people, communicating with people. Part of my professional life ended up being somewhat of a connector of people, an interviewer of people at the law firm, at the media company, and sort of periodically go back to using deeper brain is just really healthy. I mean, it's just really good for me. I can't do it all the time, but it's really good.
You've mentioned that it was, if I'm getting this correct, your third time with the same concept of the book. What was different about this time of writing it, and what do you want your readers to really take away?
Yeah, I appreciate you so much bringing that up. So we wrote, and I've got different copies of the different books. There was the first book I wrote. It didn't come together how I wanted it to come together. I had done the book with the co-author, but I really had not done the diligence to totally take charge of the entire thing in the way that I wanted it done. And so then I published it and it came out and I was ready to be done with it. So we got it out and it just looked so bad. The content was okay that I literally pulled it, very quickly, and didn't really try and distribute it because I couldn't send it to people and be proud of it. It was sort of like, oh my God. So then I went back and did another version using a publishing firm that a friend had used, and I had liked the product that they turned out. I went ahead and rewrote it, reorganized it, redid it, got some of their professional editing, did a second book. And that book is it's on my shelf here. Both books are here in the house. It was better, but it was like if the first book was a C minus D, the second book was a B minus. And then what happens is I went and got professional advice on it from somebody who, writes for a living. And he said, here's what you've missed. You've gone through 60 chapters. You combine two different things, which are business and investing. And part of that was I wanted all my thoughts in one place. But I went back and got a professional editor. And one of my close friends had said the same thing. Look, Scott, this is great. It's fine, but it doesn't really tell a story. It doesn't tell the story of how you got there, how you did this, what you did, how these things shaped your thinking and stuff like that. So that was both people. One of my best friends said it like, when you write a book and you send it to your friends, you want them to tell you this is great. And what you get back is like, oh, it's good, but you could have done this. And it was very instructive. And I ended up getting really the same piece of advice from a really professional writer who's written a lot of New York Times books. So I went back to the drawing board for all practical purposes, kept a lot of the lessons, but started from scratch in writing it to tell the story of how we did this, how we think about it, with the hope that that would be much more readable for people and that it would help people. People generally, when they get a book, they go to a meeting, they're not learning didactically. More you're hoping that they'll take something out of it. They'll come away a little inspired, a little motivated. And that's
Hmm.
what you're hoping. This isn't going to be like Peter Drucker or James Collins, one of the great business books of all time. But I think we probably have moved it from C minus D to B minus B to hopefully A minus B plus, and that people could take it and read it and enjoy it and get some motivation and entertainment out of it.
That's great. I'm for one looking forward to reading it. I think that Becker's healthcare in and of itself has such a great growth story. I can see people coming back to you and saying, make it a little bit more narrative, and have your
Yeah.
story in there because you do have an interesting story in and of itself. So I'm looking forward to it. To close this out on leadership, for leaders and our listeners that are early on in their journey, what's one decision habit that you wish you'd developed sooner?
That's a great question. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Bezos had a decision matrix or concept that as a leader, you make a lot of decisions. You got to make more right decisions than wrong decisions, and you can't overly beat yourself up over your decisions. So if I look at Roger Federer has got this great discussion online about he's won all these championships, was so great, and won something like 54% of his points. And he didn't win 80% of his points. He won 54% of his points. And Jeff Bezos always said, I got to be right more than I'm wrong. And then I got to be able to double down on things that are great, that things that are working. And so Jim Collins says something similar in his books: fire bullets, not cannons, test things, and then double down on what's working. I just think you got to be able to make decisions. You got to be good at making decisions. It's a constant learning and evolution where I have to coach some of my people is, let's say they've made a bad hiring decision. What happens is, I don't care if it's a bad hiring decision. What I don't want that to lead to is you being gun shy about hiring. You follow me? Every hiring decision you make is an educated gamble, an educated guess. Some are going to work out, some are not going to work out. What I don't want leaders to do is get scared about making decisions.
Yeah.
Because they're all educated guesses, and you don't want people making $1 million decisions all the time. You want them making small decisions, lots of small decisions, and have them be the right decisions more often than wrong, but not to beat themselves up over it, because you have to be able to double down on it, pivot, or abandon. And so you make a decision, you go after a service line. We've done it a lot at Becker's Healthcare. We didn't know when we started the hospital service line 20 years ago, we didn't know that would end up being 90% of our company. We in fact thought the other service line that we are starting at that same time would end up being the winning service line because it was adjacent to where we started. So we thought the other
Mhm.
one would be the winning line. So we ended up starting in two different lines, orthopedic and spine and hospitals and health systems. And in hindsight, it's obvious that hospitals health systems would be the big part of the company. At that time, it was not obvious to us because we were so close to orthopedic and spine and surgery centers. But the smart thing that our team did was we doubled down on the area that was growing. It wasn't like people say to me, "Oh, you were so smart to get into that area at that time," which was the surgery center area 100 years ago. And I have to remind people I wasn't so smart. I was testing 3 different areas, and that was the area that was winning, so we kept on doubling down on that area. I'm a huge believer that this concept of abstractly whiteboarding business ideas or ideas and thoughts is almost the worst thing that most of us can do. That you engage and think, engage and think, engage and think. But then many of us can get into the process where we're engaging so much that we're not thinking. And the people that are really talented can engage and think, get things done. Like you look at people you work with, it's very important that people that are task oriented. When you get people that are task oriented that can actually think too, now you're winning. Now you've got something. When you got people that are really smart and get things done and have good personal skills, now you've got a combination that's really important. So it's this constant ability to think and to execute, and it's constantly an evolution. It's not most of us aren't. I'm not. Most of us aren't smart enough just to be like, it's the same thing with this book. It's the third iteration because I didn't like the first one. The second one's okay, and I don't think the third one's better. But
Yeah, that's great. I love the fact of think and execute. I do think AI is really going to help people execute while they're thinking, because AI is going to upgrade decision making abilities since you'll have more time to do the real thinking. Uh,
But I think you're right. I mean, if you went back a generation ago, I mean, this is a great discussion in the movie Moneyball with Billy Bean, where scouting talents used to decide on somebody based on what they looked like, based on whatever it was, versus data and analytics. That was that evolution. And then obviously when people started using data analytics to make decisions, they got much better at it. And it's probably the same thing with AI. As people start to really use AI to make decisions, they get much better at it. I mean, I was amazed at just the small work I'm able to do every day with ChatGPT blows me away.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible where we're moving, and it'll be interesting to see how the world captures it as we go forward. But Scott, this has been such a thoughtful conversation. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here with the podcast. For our listeners, Scott's book is Building Great Businesses, Create Momentum, Overcome Setbacks, Scale with Confidence. It's now available for pre-order, and we will have a link to order the book as well in the show notes. And thank you, as always, for listening to the Madison Advisory AI Podcast.